Hello friends, Jef V here from Squadron. In this chapter of the Hannebu build, we're going to tackle working with resin. I know that a lot of modelers out there are still skeptic or even afraid of working with resin. But since there is a lot of resin incorporated into the second version of our Hannebu, the civilian version, I would like to demonstrate how to work with resin, how to clean it up, what to watch for, what to be careful of, and the tools you need. This will not apply only to the Hannebu. This will apply to everything, either if you are an armor builder, a figure builder, or an airplane builder. All the resin is basically the same, use the same tactics. Just follow me and let's get at it. As you can see, I have laid out all the parts, all the resin parts that come with the Haunebu II civilian version, and it's quite a lot. Now you can see resin is a cold cast method where a liquid of resin is poured into a silicone mold. Once the resin is hard, it's ready to demold and to use. To pour the resin, we always have to make a reservoir, and that generates into a carrier. So those are those annoying things that you will find on every part that you have to take off and clean. Some of them are easy to remove, other ones are a pain. I'll try to show you several ways how you can do this without damaging the parts, or at least point out what to be careful with or how to avoid any further problems or damage. So let's start with the biggest problem, the biggest part. Sometimes you get like a part like this, which is pretty decent in size. It's rather large, and also for the company to produce these, you have to have an opening at the top of the mold. When you pour that, the pattern maker always try to compensate this a little, so you have a little chamber that he has to fill. But of course, once the resin is hard, you end up with a casting block. And you can see this big part here. It is not part of the piece. It's a big resin chunk that you have to remove before you can actually glue the part on or use the part. To do this, for the ones that have a belt sander, it becomes pretty easy. And a belt sander, if you can pick up one, they're not all that expensive. And if you work a lot with resin, eventually you will earn the money back in no time. So for the ones who have a belt sander, you can do this very easily. You gently push it in a downward fashion until you can see it's flush with the piece. You can't do this real quickly. You have to really take your time for it and check it like maybe 5-6 times and make sure that you don't take too much off than actually is required. For the other ones who are not as lucky or who don't have a belt sander, of course, that's going to be some elbow grease. And by doing that, I recommend to start with a sheet of sandpaper. Now, I would start with the lowest grit you can find, very rough, and then start sanding it off, And you go in an 8. You try to make an 8 shape constantly so you evenly divide the pressure. And after a while, you go to a little more like a medium grit sandpaper, and you progress to a fine sandpaper. So eventually you will end up with this. The casting block is removed, and you will see that you end up with a flush side where you can add your detail on. It's very easy. You just have to check on it several times. Now, sanding it by hand, it's a lot more time consuming, it's a little bit annoying, it's boring, and it's a lot of work, to be very honest. Sometimes those casting blocks are way too thick and you have to work your way all the way down, and it can take up to half an hour, if not more, to remove that. But it's also the best way to control it. With a belt sander, it goes pretty quick. In a couple seconds you have that thing all sanded down, but you run the risk, if you're not careful, to go into the piece and therefore ruining it beyond repair. So you have to be your own judge about that. If you're experienced modeler, I'm sure you can easily try the belt sander, because again, it is a lot faster and a lot less cumbersome. For now, that's the only way you can do it. Since I'm talking about the Hannebu, you can see here there is a round circle in there. We have to put that in there just so the silicone won't flow in between and make the molding impossible. But these are very easy to remove. Just gently press and it will come out. All you need to do is take a little piece of sandpaper and just go around the edges here, and that's all you have to do. And maybe here and there where it's a little thicker, just take the flash off. And your part is ready to use. So no big deal here. Next on our list is the wheels. As you can see here, we have a lot of wheels. As a matter of fact, 12 in total. The Hannebu has 4 landing gear sets. So you have to clean those wheels up. Again, for the ones who have a belt sander, it's easy to put it on there and sand it off that way. Or you can use like a saw, like a miniature saw. You can buy these online or in hobby shops. And these are, of course, more controllable than, let's say, a belt sander again. So I know it's tempting in most cases to use sprue nippers to just cut them off here and they will snap off. But you run the risk with stuff like this, like when you use a sprue nipper, to really also remove a chunk of the wheel itself, of detail. So I would not recommend it, especially not on the wheels. There are pieces or parts where you can use a sprue nipper and it will snip off and then you can sand it. But in this case, I would not take the risk and I would use the razor saw. So let's do this a few times. See, and now you just have to snap it off and then you just have to clean up the remaining parts here. They will come off easily, as you can see. Dremel will also work. There are several tools that or implements that you can put in the Dremel and it will do the job too. Resin is also a very hard material and it's not as soft as plastic, so it will also sand a little better. As you can see, again, start with a with a coarse sanding stick and then work yourself down all the way to a fine grade. If you look closely, I'll point this out, if you look closely where the support was on the casting block, it also generated some resin in between the grooves, but these are easily removed with a sharp knife. You just cut it on both sides and just wipe it off there. Again, you cut in there and you cut it here. And you can remove it. Maybe a little sandpaper, you can go into the groove and smooth it out. Or if you have a little miniature file, you can easily clean those grooves up and make it look all uniform and flush. I'm not going to demonstrate all 12 wheels of it, but I think you get the picture. Be very, very careful. Patience is on the order of the day. You don't need to rush this. You only get one set. If you take your time, you will have no problem. Next on the list, let's talk about these little discs here. We include 4 of these discs. These are replacements for the Hannebu II military version, where we have 4 ball turrets underneath the saucer. So the ball turrets in this version are eliminated and replaced by these discs for the civilian version. If you have one that looks more like this, where you have a midsection that is filled with resin, try to punch it out or cut it out. It should not be very hard to do. If you have one that has a thick carrier again on that, then you have to go through the same motions and try to sand it out, or just use a drill. If you have a drill at home, just use the size of the hole, use a drill bit that is the same size and just drill straight through it. It is important that those holes in the middle are clear and clean. Don't worry a lot about the size of the casting block. As long as you can drill a hole in the middle, you should be fine, because they won't interfere with anything. These discs will immediately drop into the bottom of the saucer. On the back side, you just have to make sure that the hole has to be clean, drilled through. But now I'm lost for words. When you turn this around, you can see there is also, of course, the casting block. In this case, it's not as bad, but you don't have to worry about it either. The casting block is pretty big. There is no reason to get that off. All you have to make sure that the hole, the punch that you made, that it's clean through, because that will come back later to apply some other stuff. As I was mentioning, in the military version, you had like 4 ball turrets on the bottom of the saucer. In the civilian version, these are to be removed and replaced by those 4 discs. And as you can tell, they will go in from the inside and they will fit nicely into the cutout. That's all it is. This is the back, so there is no reason to clean this up. Just make sure that the hole is nice and clean. I have a finished one here, or at least a primed one, and you can tell, you can see all these discs are in place. And this is the one I just left in for dramatic purposes, basically. And you can see that this one is not drilled. The reason that we have holes in these discs is twofold. First of all, we provided also with a deep space type radio antenna that can protrude from the outside, and then eventually it will be covered with a canopy with clear dome. The other reason that we provided these holes is that you can put like an LED lighting set in there, so you can easily light it up or provide landing lights whatsoever, but at least you get the chance or the opportunity to mount like a wiring harness in there, and you can light up your disc. So these by itself are not really hard to do. Again, you don't really need to clean it up. You just have to make sure that the puncture in the middle is nice and smooth and round, and then the rest is just mounting them in the provided cutouts, and that's all. So we're going to put these on the side since we don't have to worry about these. Then next to it we have more intricate parts. Like this here, this is a radome or a cover. It goes on the side, on the top side of the Hannebu. And this you can maybe take the risk to basically cut it off with wire snippers. Always make sure you wear eye protection, because sometimes these little tiny snippets of resin can go anywhere and it might hit your eye. It wouldn't be the first time, speak of experience. These can be cleaned up the conventional way with sprue nippers, and then of course the old knife here. Always make sure that you don't cut your fingers. And once you get most of the carrier off, or most of the support, you get like the sanding stick and just sand until you see that all the protruding or extra or flash is all gone. Make it round a little like this, and then you get a nice and smooth like a disc. That's all it takes. Just first the snippers, a little bit with the knife, and then the good old sanding stick or some sandpaper. Then we have really intricate parts. Now these usually come off the carrier very easily. Like for instance, I know that I can just by putting out a little bit of pressure, I can just snap those off. Since they're mounted on the carrier in an angle, you can see, because this also simplifies the molding process, they're usually put in an angle, so when you demold the mold, it's easier to get them out. But it also means that there is a lot of undercut. As you can see, whenever you extract the piece out of the mold, there is a little cut here, like a little hook. We call it an undercut. Sometimes we have to cut the mold to get the pieces out. When you cut the mold, there is 99% there will be a little bit of a seam line, as you can barely see here, and there is some flash coming out. That needs to be cleaned up, but in this case this is very easy. You can actually use the multi-purpose pad. You just go over it and the flash will almost instantly disappear. So this is not really a big deal. Just make sure when you snap these off that you support it a little. Don't go too fast, or if you don't want to take any risk, then just saw them off with your razor saw. Those air hoses here, they are attached to this oxygen scrubber device. It will recycle the oxygen. You probably have to clean up the insert point where it meets the little hole you see on the side here, and then you just push it in there, and with some super glue it should attach. This is the same thing when we clean the big one here, the big part. You have the same little kind of a cleanup. Either you do this on a belt sander if you have one, or you can either saw it off, or in this case I'm sure it's safe to say to use the nippers. So let me demonstrate this for a little bit, and then try to get this off, or at least get most of it off. And then again, go all the way. Start with a heavy grit, with a low grit basically, and just sand it off until it becomes flush on the back here, and then you can mount these on your observation deck. So this whole contraption that you finally build up, you can finally mount that. As you can see here, we have the hoses, and then also they are both attached to the oxygen cleaning stations or oxygen scrubber devices that can be easily mounted on there. You can also see here there are 4 bolts on there. You will find in your set there's like one little carrier, and you can see those 4 bolts on there. Also easy, very easy to remove. You can easily either use your saw and saw those off one by one. Let's remove 2 of those. Or you can cut those off, but again, be very careful how you do it. If you have a fine sprue nipper like the premium version here, where the beak is really thin, you can easily do that. And then you just, with your hobby knife, just make them cut more excess resin off until you're almost flush with the part itself. And then just sand it with a fine sanding stick. And then you have a clean part. Last but not least, and this is maybe a little bit more of a tricky part. This is the rear observation bunker. As you can see here on the finished piece, you can get this device right here. You have to clean that up, and since it was cast or poured upside down, we had to put the carrier on the top of on the roof of the bunker. This I would suggest to cut off with your sprue nippers as much as you can. And be very careful, because those things will fly everywhere. Make sure you wear air protection, and then just cut the excess off. Watch the fingers. Or for the lucky few who have a belt sander, it's the same method. But this can be easily cleaned up. Try to cut it off as close as you can, and then when you're almost there, you use the coarse sanding stick or sandpaper if you have it, and just sand it down as far as you can. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, a lot of guys, a lot of people actually are still afraid and a little weary about the use of resin, but it's not all that bad. Resin gives you the opportunity, or gives the modeler the opportunity, to do or to add detail to an existing kit that the plastic manufacturer is almost impossible for them to do. So since it's being poured in a silicone mold, the mold is flexible, therefore the manufacturer of the resin can add a lot more detail to the part. I hear a lot of people say, you know what, resin is not for me, I'm not familiar, I don't like to work with super glue because I can't control it. But you should at least give it a try. Start with something small. It's quite rewarding. Once you get it done and once you add the extra detail to your piece, it is very rewarding. It takes a little bit more work in cleaning up, but the detail is so much more captivating. You can also use some like a fine grit. In this case I used an 800, and then just put it on a flat surface, so you can really make it very smooth here. Now when you look closely, you see a couple of air holes here. These are very, I'm not saying it's hard to avoid them, but in the casting process, sometimes it all depends how your mold is set up. Also on the kind of resin. Sometimes the resin, since the whole process of resin casting into a silicone mold happens in a vacuum chamber where there is an absolute vacuum being pulled, sometimes the resin sets very quickly and it becomes solid in no time. So you have not a lot of time to air out the air bubbles. Sometimes it all depends how the part is set up, that air bubbles get trapped underneath and they don't have time to escape or to go to the surface and then evaporate. Now some of them, while the resin start to set, are trapped and they will generate small air bubbles. By itself, it's more an annoyance than a problem, but sometimes it's almost impossible to avoid these things in the production process. There's a couple of ways to fix this. What I like to do is sometimes I just use a piece of plastic sheet. I'll demonstrate that last. So let's talk about another way to fix this. You can see you have all these little air holes here. What you can do is fill those with super glue. You can put like tiny bits of super glue on each one of them, let it set hard, and then sand them off again. Usually does the trick. Or you can use a modeler's putty, do the same thing, clean them up a little, then just push or try to press the putty in there. Make it flush again, wait until it's dry, and then sand it again. If you really want to go to eliminate it in the easiest way, it's actually easier to do this, but it maybe takes a little bit more work, but it's the result is more rewarding. Is that when you use like the 10,000ths of plastic sheet, or let's say 0.25 millimeters, got a piece of almost the size of your resin part, and then just make sure that this the roof of the bunker here, in this case, that it's smooth and flush, that you don't have any, that all the residue of the carrier is completely gone, and make sure that it's completely flush and smooth. Then you just put a blob of super glue on here, and then you just press this thing in there and let it sit on there like this. After you apply the super glue on it, you can already tell that the super glue is forming around the piece, and it forms an airtight seal around the plastic and the resin. Now all you have to do is cut off around it, cut most of the excess off. The super glue is still wet because we used a lot. Just gonna let it dry for about 30 minutes until it's completely dry, and then I can start sanding all around. You sand with the angles of the piece, and once that's done, you have an absolutely perfect rooftop, like a smooth piece here. You don't have to worry about the bubbles, you don't have to putty, you don't have to put super glue on there and sand it and do it again. This is actually the best way to do this to eliminate the problem, and it will work for everything. Even in this case, where we said that we have a lot of sanding to do. Sometimes there is maybe a little hole here and there, or you're not 100% happy how smooth you got it, or maybe you even took out a little bit too much. It's the same thing. Just use 0.1 of an inch of 0.25 millimeter plastic sheet, and just do the super glue on there, plant your piece up there, and just cut it off, and you have a nice smooth surface. It's actually advisable because then you're sure you have a perfect finish. So I think we covered everything here. As you can tell, it's no big deal. It's just a little bit more work, but it makes it so much more intriguing, so much more rewarding that you can build another version of this once everything is glued on and in place. I would suggest, especially in this case, this is going to be a silver saucer or an aluminum saucer. I would prime it with a gray primer, either from Vallejo or from Tamiya. I'll leave that up to you, but I would give it a nice smooth primer. This way you can see if you have any imperfections. You can also come back and maybe sand it a little bit here, or add some putty there, or if you miss something, you can see basically all the detail will pop up. Again, don't be afraid of using resin. Don't be turned off by it, because there is so much opportunity and so much possibilities that resin can do. It will give you satisfaction. You will learn something. The more you get into the resin sets, the more detail you can add on, and the more, at the end of the day, the more detail you can bring to your table or to the piece you're working on. Resin takes a little bit more patience, but again, it is so rewarding. So guys, as you can see, no big deal. Working with resin, it's not really that hard. You don't have to be afraid of it. You just have to try it. It's just trial by error. Squadron has a whole variety of resin subjects, either from figures to accessories for planes, for armor. So try it out. Very rewarding. You can add a lot of detail to your project. But for now, that was it. Jef V here, signing off. If you like what we have to say and you want to see more of this, please subscribe to Squadron TV, or make your friends subscribe, or even your puppy. You can also follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook.